So, welcome to Trans 101 for Magic Judges. My name is Elaine. I'm a level 2 from Calgary, Alberta, in the frozen wastes of Canada. Very, I think that's my first time. No, it's my second time saying that in a presentation, and I'm still like feel really good about actually being in Canada. Um, but yeah, so this is so the general structure for this presentation is that I'm going to do an intro thing about like why this is important, and that I'm going to go over the Trans 101 basics. That is just like the same things that I would be saying to any group of people where I'm doing a presentation like this, um, which it which like I've done this kind of presentation like a couple dozen times. This is my first time doing it for Magic Judges, so might be a bit bumpy, but we'll see. Um, and then I'll go into like Magic specific things that are considerations that probably a lot of judges haven't thought about, right? So, uh, and also some ground rules here. I I this presentation I told Klaus that was going to take like 25 minutes, and then he's like, "Okay, I'll give you an hour." So I have plenty of time for questions, and like I've and like I mentioned in the pre-roll, um, I have a fair amount of experience streaming and reading chat. So just shout out your questions whenever, and I'll get to them when I get to them. Right? Formerly of the frozen wastes of the Midwest. It's not. It can't be frozen in the Midwest. Whatever. All right. So a little bit about me first. I'm originally from St. Louis in the U.S. I've been playing since Gatecrash, so like early 2013. Um, and I got my L1 pretty quickly after that in September of the following year. I was out for a couple. Um, okay. I was out for a couple years in between then. Came back in June of 2018, got my L2 very quickly after that, started working on the GP/Magic Fest circuit a bit. I wrote Rules Lawyer, which is an application kind of like JudgeBot. I think mine is better, which is basically you can answer it answers like rules questions on Discord by like it's like a search engine. Um, I mostly play Blue Decks, and I mostly play Legacy and Vintage. So my pet card right now is is Ethereal Voyager, which is there. But in the past, cards have been like Flusterstorm, Click, Narset, stuff like that. Just to get an idea of the kind of things that I play. And I also play Vintage Rotisserie Draft, which I think a lot of people may know me from there. But beyond that, like I'm also very active in trans activism, right? Like I'm a trans woman. I do a lot of like rallies and speeches and stuff. Obviously, most of these pictures are pre-pandemic, um, and I'm even like I'm married to another trans woman. So like, yeah. But I think it's important to go over that first part first, right? One second. Because like, click in our set. Oh my God. Um, so I think it's important to go over that first part first because obviously in the context of this presentation, the second part is more important, right? But in the context of like my interactions with Magic judges and Magic players as a whole, I think that first part's more important because that's the part that I generally like to present, right? Like when I started working on the GP circuit, like I think a lot of people didn't realize I was queer until like 6 or 7 GPs in, which is insane to me. But I mean, at the start, like I was just like, I'm here to do my tasks, and I'm here to do my tasks. I feel like I'm playing Among Us. Um, I'm here to like do whatever it is that you need me to do, and like my personal thing will come later or it comes second. Uh, which I think brings me to the first and like most important point here is that I'm okay with sharing my private information, like in the context of this presentation. Obviously, that comes with doing this presentation, right? But that doesn't mean that everyone wants to share their life story. So if you go to, so please don't just go to another trans judge or another trans magic player and ask them personal questions. It's not great. And even like if Magic Fests start hopefully when Magic Fests start up again, and if you accost me at one where I am in the middle of a deck check, I might be pretty annoyed with you. I mean, I won't be super annoyed with you, and I probably will answer your question eventually. But, you know, if I'm there to do a deck check, I want to focus on the deck check, right? So just bring that out there. So the point here in general is to foster an environment that is as welcoming to trans players as possible. And make this space feel like it's a space where people can feel free to be authentic. I did a poll on Twitter a couple months ago where basically I asked people when they started playing Magic. So this poll was like only trans Magic players, and I asked them like when they started playing Magic in relation to when they started transitioning, and the overwhelming number, an overwhelming number of people said that they learned Magic before they realized that they were trans, which means that they then chose to transition while in the space. And I think that's great because it's like this is a space where people feel safe, right? Like that is fundamentally a good thing. But it is not something that like just happens, right? It's something that people have actively been fostering, and it's something that we have to continue to actively foster. So the point of this presentation is that being an ally doesn't imply knowledge, and I am here to give you knowledge. So here is some knowledge. So let's go to just the pure basics, right? Start with a definition from the dictionary, which I'm sure you all saw coming. So this is from, I think, just dictionary.com, but I like this definition. They're all basically the same. Noting or relating to a person whose gender identity does not correspond to that person's sex assigned at birth. So as a very simple example, when I was born, the doctors assigned me male. So my original birth certificate says male, and there is, and like I was given a male name at birth, but now I live as a woman, and I think of myself as a woman, and that is how I interact with society at large, because I think that makes me function a lot better for various reasons. So that's quite simple. I'm sure you all knew that, but there's a lot in this definition actually that you probably didn't think of. So like, for example, a lot of people say, well, doesn't correspond to that person's sex assigned at birth means that you were born male and now you live as a woman, or you were born female and now you live as a man. But it's a lot more complicated than that, because there are a lot of people who live somewhere in between there, or somewhere where they feel like they identify with parts of either traditional gender or identify with neither. And that experience is going to be different for each person. My other screen is turning off. There are no questions. Yeah, feel free to ask questions. Don't be shy. And also, there was plenty of time to do that. The second thing that you may have noticed is that the definition says nothing about what I generally term as medical intervention. So uh, there are a lot of people who, as part of transition, will start taking hormones or have various surgeries. And but like that, none of that is required, right? Like you there's no like you have to have done XYZ and then you are trans. Like it's not it's not that simple. And that's something that depends on each individual person. I have to apologize. It is extremely dry in Calgary. I'm in like the mountains basically, and I'm still not used to it because I was raised in a place where I'm next to a river and it's very not dry. So I talk for like 3 minutes and my throat completely gets destroyed. So that is what that is. But yeah, there is no there, but yeah, there's no expectation that an individual person goes through an amount of medical transition. There's a lot of different reasons why someone might choose not to do this, and like it's and their reasons might like they are not something that really needs to be shared, but there's a lot of things that you might not think of, right? Like so these three cards represent three common reasons why someone may not want to go through medical transition. Um, the first one, the wall of denial, represents access, right? That for either financial or social or like family reasons, they don't have access to them, even in countries with universal healthcare, which I know is a lot of European countries, is the case in Canada. Um, some things will be covered, but some other things will not be covered. So, for example, in Canada, like they will cover hormones, they will cover like bottom surgery, but they won't cover facial surgery, they won't cover voice surgery. Um, so that is so like that might be an issue, and obviously there are lots of people who there are lots of people who feel safe coming out in a magic space, but don't feel safe coming out in the rest of their lives, or aren't ready to like do that yet. So they may not have access to. And even if they are covered, the waiting lists are often extremely long. Yes, that is a criticism I have seen of the British system and also a lot of other European systems, but particularly the British system. What's in someone's pen should only be relevant to them, their doctor, and their sexual partners. Right. But in particular, what I'm trying to say here is that there are lots of judges who identify as trans, but I have seen criticism of them that basically amounts to they don't look like they're trying. That like if you haven't taken hormones or you haven't had these surgeries, that you aren't really trans, or that there's something else going on there. But like no, like things can happen, right? Um, the right. Some people would be risking personal safety by coming out at home. That is, I know a lot of people who are like that. Um, the second reason here, represented by decision, the decision paralysis, is that they may not be sure if they want it, right? Like for me, it was very like I was very certain about the things that I wanted, but that is not always the case for everybody. And there's lots of discussion in a lot of trans groups about like, how do I know if I want XYZ, right? Or like, how do I know if I want this for the right reasons? Or how do I know if it's worth it? The third reason is that it could just be too risky for that individual person, right? Like any surgery obviously comes with some amount of risk because you are being cut open and parts are being moved around and then you are sewn back up, and like that is always going to be scary no matter what it is, right? Um, for me personally, like I would like to have I would like to have some sort of voice surgery, because I don't like how I sound, but but a lot of the techniques are like pretty experimental. So for me, that is too risky. But even something as simple as taking hormones, like which is which is pretty standard for a lot of trans people, isn't an option for everybody. Like I know a trans woman who has a serious heart problem that prevents them from being able to take estrogen. And it sucks. Like I've seen what they're going through and it is miserable. But like that's not something that you would know from like seeing this person on the street. Like if you see them on the street, it's like why is this man wearing a dress, or why is this trans person clearly not trying? But that's not what's going on, right? And the point here is that it's not anyone's place here to judge if someone is trans enough. It's only our responsibility to support them how we are able to. So that is, I guess, like the basic Trans 101 stuff. Does anyone have any questions about this? I see a lot of other queer people in the chat, which makes me feel really good about this. I see some people typing, so I'll give you a second while I drink my water. Taking hormones isn't simple either. You're messing with your body's chemistry. Medical advice is a necessity. Right. That is something that like it does, like hormones have a lot of side effects, and that's something that I will go into, at least in a context that is relevant. What would you want someone to do as an ally if they encountered someone making that sort of assertions? I think it is always it is I think it is harder for trans people to stand up for other trans people in that sort of situation, because it's like the way that I am perceived is already somewhat vulnerable, because it's like, well, like I've been out for like 4 or 5 years, but like I still sometimes have those moments when like I think people just treat me this way because they're trying to be nice. And but like so it is, I will stand up for people, but it is there that comes with a cost. But if you see someone doing that, I think it is I think it is something where it's like you have to make it known that that is not acceptable, right? And there may not be any harm intended by that person who's just like, well, like they might just think that like, oh, well, they're being like logical or rational about it, but like you just have to call them out and say it's not acceptable, and say, there's a ton of different reasons why someone may not look like they're trying. The other consideration is that like sometimes people are trying, right? Like sometimes people have done these things and they just aren't effective, right? Like I'm really happy with how I've turned out, in me taking hormones and me having the surgeries that I've wanted, but hormones affect each person in different ways, and sometimes it'll take a long time. Can you think of any specific instances in judgings where you're particularly proud of a cis person's backup or support? So there was that you're willing to share. for me, like, I am privileged in a way, I think, to be um, in a place where I have transitioned fully, and it is, I think, very difficult for someone to say that I either like haven't been trying or haven't, or like that I don't look like a woman. But I mean, I'm friends with a lot of other trans Magic players, and I've heard many instances of someone being aggressively misgendered by their opponent, and a judge like stepping in um, and saying like, "Hey, that's not acceptable. You have to like please treat your opponent with the same respect you treat everybody else." So thankfully, it hasn't happened too often to me. It happened a couple times, like I haven't had issues. I had issues like towards the start of my transition, but a lot of that was at my LGS, and the people there already knew me. And I think it was just like people were used to me presenting in a certain way, but that was a long time ago, and I don't even think about it anymore. All right. So I don't see any more questions, so I will keep going. But obviously, like if you have more questions, like continue to put them in the chat, and I will get to them. The second part of this is that oh, someone was typing and then they stopped typing. Okay. The second part of this is that I want to have some. I want to present some like magic specific considerations that I think that like that you can actually apply in um, in your work. Um, and a lot of this may not come up specifically for you, and it's like, well, these are things that you should be telling trans magic players. Why are you telling me? But the whole point here is that the reason why I'm presenting this at this particular conference is that all of you are in spaces where you can where you can interact with a large number of players, and once you interact with a sufficiently large number of players, you will see all different kinds of players, and some of them will be trans, and some of them will not really know what they're doing. They might be new to that whole thing, and having someone to guide them and give them certain information would be really helpful. And I've done this for countless numbers of trans players and trans L1s. The one consideration that I will say here is that I know this is a European conference, though I think a lot of the Europeans went to bed already. Um, but I understand that this is a European conference, and that um, there there is a little bit of a culture gap. So you have to keep in mind that I'm originally from the US, and it's 5 p.m. here. I don't know time zones. So you have to keep in mind that I'm originally from the US and now living in Canada, which it can be very different culturally. So if there is some thing that I am saying that won't work in your particular culture, just still keep it in mind, but try to figure out how you would adapt that, right? Um, it is currently 9:21. I woke up at like 8:30 or 8:25 or something. So the first thing that I've seen a lot is, when you sit down for your team meeting, I would say, "Hi everybody, my name is Elaine. My pronouns are she, her," which is really important, I think, for a lot of, because that like normalizes that that's a thing that you have to introduce yourself with, that you are basically, April lasted 5 months. This last Tuesday feels like it lasted more than 5 days. Um, there are, so like, I lost my train of thought. Right. So the point here is that you say my pronouns are whatever, um, and that normalizes that it's not something that you could just assume of someone. That just because someone looks like they are male, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are. Right? It's something which I think is really cool. Personally, I feel like this isn't for me in particular, but there are a lot of trans people who say that that helps. So I will continue to encourage it. The one thing that I have seen a lot, and this happens almost every time, is that in the team there is at least one person who says, my pronouns are whatever. And I have never had the strength to um to call them out on it. I'm gonna be honest, but like that really isn't acceptable. Um, like, and what almost always happens is when someone says that, I want to like, if they're like male presenting, which most of the time they're male presenting, I just want to like aggressively use like female pronouns with them just to make that point. But once again, I am not that confrontational. But it is definitely something that I have seen a lot of people do, and people need to stop doing, because the whole point of that is to like normalize it. And if you have the privilege where you look like a certain way, and people will use pronouns for you in that particular way, there's a certain expectation that you are going to like like when someone else says my pronouns are whatever, like that, like there's an expectation that you follow suit in a certain way. Apparently the idea was to have the same proportion of non-declaring cis folk as non-declaring trans folk. I That is strange. Restraining someone to make a point seems not great. Yeah, I mean I don't do it, but I've tried to use they them if I am unsure of pronouns. Good or bad thing. I mean, that is, there are certain people who, so that's tricky, right? So um there is, so my partner always says, her line is that cis people don't understand they them pronouns until they encounter a trans person that they don't like. Um, which basically means, which basically is this observation that like if there's a trans person who's obviously like trying or like is somehow new, or maybe they are presenting quite well, but you just don't like them. They're just like aggressively use gender neutral pronouns in an effort to like aggressively not use preferred pronouns, which is, I don't know how to handle that. But for the most part, I am okay with people using. But I am okay with people using gender neutral pronouns. But obviously, if someone says, "Hey, don't do that. My pronouns are she/her," or like whatever, obviously use that. I have a pin. I don't have a pin. I thought I had a pin. I don't know where it went. Um, yeah. Doesn't work in gendered languages such as German or Spanish. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. um, yeah. So using that if you don't, so using they them if you don't know is fine, but I think that also comes with language, right? Because I think a lot of languages, if you use gender neutral pronouns, there's an implication that you're referring to that person as an object, like the same way that if you call someone it, that's not okay. Um, but I am not a linguist, and I'm sure y'all know that a lot more than I do. Repeating the name and trying to avoid using pronouns at all might help. That runs into the same problem, right? Where it's like if like it's very clear that you're like aggressively trying to use. Yeah, it is. I would, or if you're not sure, I would go towards using they them. Is it rude to ask about one person's pronouns? I'm afraid of hurting their feelings. So generally, what people say is that you should say, so like, if I'm meeting someone, I say, my name's Elaine, my pronouns are she, her. What is your name and pronouns? So by saying mine first, that that makes it easier for the other person to respond in the same way without implying like, oh, I don't know what you're supposed to look like. Yeah, so I would ask, but it's about like asking in a way that's like, oh, I'm just making an introduction rather than like I'm assuming a certain thing about you. Whoa, it's a lot of people. I'm gonna keep going here. The second thing here is that, and I think this comes up a lot, is that people's names in whatever system that they're in doesn't match what their preferred name is. Which, and a lot of people don't know how to change that. And once again, this is one of those things where if you're not trans or if this won't come up for you, then you may feel like you don't need to know this. But the point is that you should know this so that if there is a player in your event or there's a lower level judge that you're mentoring where this will come up for them, then you know it, right? So for players, it's a little complicated. Basically, I confirmed this with the new system with WotC customer support. But basically, the scorekeeper can change a person's name in their particular system, but that'll only work locally. So if this is your LGS, like you can change that. But in order to change it in their Wizards account, you have to contact WotC support, which can be a process and can be difficult for a lot of people. But if they don't want to go through that process and don't want to feel confrontational, you should feel able to change it in your local system without too much trouble. The only consideration is that with larger level events that award cash prizes, sometimes for tax reasons, especially at GPs, the name in the system at the end has to be that person's legal name. So what they will generally do is they will change the name right before posting the final standings, so that through the entire time at the event they are known as a particular name, and then once it is submitted for tax purposes, then only then does their legal name appear. It doesn't even change locally since there's no stored information. You can only change the name for a single event. Yeah, I haven't worked with EventLink before, so I just like asked WotC customer support, and they were like, "Yeah, you can change it locally." But that's annoying. God, EventLink, why? Okay, I am not looking forward to working with that once events start back up. The process for judges is actually a lot easier. With the Judge Academy system, you can actually just go in and change your own name. Um, with the previous system under Judge Apps, it was actually pretty complicated. You had to email your RC, which like for a lot of newer level judge, like newer judges or like fresher ones, like emailing your RC is scary, right? Like so that was definitely a huge barrier, and I have definitely emailed like RCs on behalf of other judges, being like, "Hey, I'm sending this person to you. Can you change their name from X to Y?" Newer ones didn't necessarily even know who the RC was. Right. Yeah, like I would be like, so you have to talk to your RC, your RC, and they're like, I don't know who my RC is, and I'm like, okay, what state do you like live in? And then I'll be like, oh, it's this person, and then they'll be like, well, I don't want to email someone with a lot of letters after their name. That's kind of scary. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. So I would poke this person for them. TOs can change your name for each tournament on event link. Right. Right. Okay. So I will get to the display name on the next slide. So yeah, like it is pretty simple now that you can just change your name, however, like to whatever you would like it to be. There's even a separate field for mailing address. So like your mailing address, if you're living with people who aren't supportive, that address can have whatever name your family or whatever will know. And when I asked Nico about this, she told me that a lot of trans people actually think like, oh, well, you change your display name. That's the thing that is shown to everybody. That should be good, but that's not necessarily the case. Because when you apply to an event, it shows your full name and not your display name. And you can actually change your full name to whatever as well, as long as you know that is the name that you are going to be going by. This is likely a legal thing for contracts, right? But I think it is still useful to be able to apply with your chosen name, and then after you're accepted, you can say like, oh well, on the contract I would like on the contract you have to put something else. Um, which is the same way that I would apply to any other job, right? Where it's like, which I mean, I've changed my name. It's been years since I've done that, but like even before then, like I would put my preferred name on my I would put my voice is broken. I would put my preferred name on my resume, and then once I'm going through like HR onboarding stuff, then I'd be like, oh, for my um, contract stuff, you have to put this other name. Certified before RCs were a thing. Yeah, but you're not old, Daniel. You're just certified when you were like 11. Venerable? I mean, it's not false. Yeah, so just the point is to keep in mind that the display name does not have to be like, oh, this is your preferred name and this is your legal name. They can both be your preferred name. That's fine. Just keep that in mind. My slides are out of order. I'm going to come back to this. Another consideration here is that a lot of judges who are newer, like we've all heard the story of like the hero L1 or like fresh L2 to a GP who tries to do everything and ends up just completely burning out, right? Like everyone Everyone has heard this. Everyone has probably seen this. I was that person for like the first two Magic Fests I worked, um, and some of you probably remember that, um, which obviously isn't great. It is it is even worse for people who are, but like it is even worse for people who are newer, who are transitioning and are newer to that, which which I think actually has. I have observed that there are a lot of trans judges who basically start transitioning while an L1 or like a fresh L2, so aren't super experienced with it. And that will actually compound it, right? Because like if they're taking medical intervention, if they're taking hormones, like that will change how your body works. And a lot of these people they don't realize that. It it and so the like you have less muscle mass than you used to, like, and by used to I mean like 2 months ago. um Compounded with the fact that like you were trying to do everything, that I have seen people collapse. It is really bad. And I've seen people be like, man, I don't know why I'm like so much more tired than I normally am. But it's like, well, it's because you used to be able to lift 70 pounds and now you cannot, sorry, you used to be able to lift 30 kilos and now you can't do that anymore because you're taking this medication, and one of the side effects is that your muscles will vanish. And also for like, and the reverse is also true. Like for a lot of transmasculine judges, once they start taking testosterone, they think they're invincible. But turns out that takes a lot. That takes a couple months or maybe even years to like fully kick in. So I have seen them also struggle a lot. So it's something that obviously with any person who is newer to like large events, I would want to keep an eye on them for this sort of thing. But especially with trans people who don't yet even know how their body works. Testosterone is male privilege. Right. I mean, but the thing is, like, much like what I mentioned before, is that some people are actually taking these things, but they don't actually work as well as they would expect, or as much as. And the worst part is that I'm in Canada now too, so like people use kilos here, but people also use pounds. So, um, like I I I, I deserve that. Um, but like people don't always realize that hormones take a while to work, and we just assume that people people are trolling me. That's expected. Um, so that's something. This is something that you should keep in mind. Um, the other consideration here is, who has seen a person who doesn't drink water while you're on the floor? That's not me, right? But that totally is me. I've done that so many times. On topic, this is totally new info about the effects of hormones. Right, like there's a lot of there's actually this like 120-page document, um, that basically it is the like Bible for like medical transition, and you can read it, but I don't recommend it because it's quite long. But yeah, these are things that like I have picked out to be like these are things that could be relevant or are relevant. Um, okay, so people don't drink water, right? For a lot of trans women, it gets even worse because the testosterone suppressor that a lot of trans feminine people take, um, it 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 dehydrates you, um, and that makes it even worse. Which think I am so glad to not be on that anymore, but a lot of people are. Like, and I know in Europe there's actually a different medication that they prescribe, but I think it has the same issues. Um, so obviously you tell everybody to go drink some water, but especially people who need to be drinking water for normal reasons and also need to be drinking water because their body is doing new things. Um, I've I've seen some really miserable things. Um, Body wants a lot of water. Yeah. Taking testosterone can lead to that's yeah. That is not related. That is not magic particularly related, but that I have heard is is true. Yes, that's yes. Thank you, Harry. All right. Going back to that slide I skipped. Um, a lot of one thing that I've seen quite often is that so like you know how at GPs, particularly for like side events, um, you are expected to scream at 140 people or whatever to like scream your announcements because you don't have a microphone, and how a lot of judges struggle with that. Um, Obviously, this is something that will affect trans people who don't necessarily like how their voice sounds. Um, and what ends up happening, especially this was me the first like 3 or 4 events I did, was that I tried to like I cannot scream at this register, much less a higher register. Um, and if I try, then like like it won't work for that context. So my thing disconnected. Um, so it is something that what ends up happening is that they end up trying that and then no one can hear them. So something that I have offered for that have offered for in the past, like, do you want me to do your announcements for you? And I think that this is like one of those things that like I don't know how to go about this super well because I am not like super experienced with mentorship. Like if I were to do my L3 checklist, I would not rate myself highly on mentorship. I think that's one of the things, right? I haven't actually done an L3 checklist. Um, but like so like this is one of those things where I would defer to other people's experience on how to best handle this, but I'm just trying to put this problem out there, that like a lot of people struggle with, uh, a, a lot of trans people struggle with projecting, right? Like taking estrogen doesn't raise the pitch of your voice. That doesn't happen, which is why I kind of want to have some sort of voice surgery. But once again, that doesn't that is not is too risky for me at this time. And taking testosterone will actually lower the pitch of your voice, but once again, that takes a while. That takes some upwards of a year or two sometimes. So that's something that a lot of people will struggle with. So it is a consideration. I don't know how to best handle this, but I would would like to put this issue out there. I see a couple of people typing. There's another Discord that I'm on has a LGBTQ channel, and one of the things that discussed on a daily basis is voice training and voices for it. Right. So a lot of trans women work on voice training because I've been a part of those channels. That won't raise the pitch of your voice, right? That'll just that just means speaking in such a way that it sounds more feminine without and working around that. And also, if you're screaming at people, that doesn't, all that kind of goes out the window because you kind of just have to be as loud as you can. At my old store, like Moonbase, there is. Okay. At, at my at my old local store, I always made sure that they had a microphone, and that was like godsend for me. That was so nice. So if you're a TO, please get a microphone for your judges. And honestly, what judge wants to be screaming at players? It it sucks. So if there's a smaller event, I say smaller, but if there's a 5K or something, don't make your head just scream at the players, please. I realize that I'm not really in a position to be demanding that, but I'm asking, right? Please do that. Rip Moonbase. It was very nice. It was a very good store. How large are 5Ks? Like 200 people? Usually. Maybe a bit less. Like 150 to 200. Basically, the idea there being a smaller TO running one of their larger events is what I'm referring to, basically. Or even a single judge event. I don't want to scream over 50 people. I'm sorry. 10-minute timer. I'm just answering questions at this point. So yeah. So there's once again, a lot of these last things are just considerations, and I would, and obviously I can tell you how I would handle them, but once again, I'm not super experienced with mentorship, so that's something that other people if you have a suggestion, please talk to me, right? Here's my socials. Obviously, I'm just making suggestions. Right. I mean, I've done that. That runs into the same problem of L1s or a lot of newer judges are resistant to the idea of jobs being taken away from them, which I mean, I am also guilty of, right? And at this point, I've accepted that if large events ever happen again, I'm just gonna scream at people. I'm not gonna worry about what I sound like, right? I'm just gonna do it. But that is not. But I've accepted that sucks. That's part of that job. But what I think you don't want is for people to end up trying to do a certain voice and then end up that resulting in nobody hearing them. Yeah, you can. God, sounds like you need to be okay. I've seen that, but I thought it was just a tag group. I may join that and answer people's questions. I think that would I might do that. Yeah, that seems cool. No, I've definitely seen this. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. But I, 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 I think the most important thing here is that, like, beyond the content of this presentation, that, like, at least I've gotten all of you to start thinking about this, right? That, like, there's a large portion, like, I'm not going to go back that many slides, but, like, there were 300 people who responded to that Twitter poll. That's so many Magic players, right? And, like, and like that was just with me like not having any clout and being like, hey, can people retweet this? I'm sure there's a lot more than that. I'm in a I'm in a Discord of only trans Magic players, and I think at last count, at my last count at least, there was like 270 people in it. Um, and like I'm sure there's a ton that we haven't found, right? Like it is there was a there's a lot of people, and like I'm glad that a lot of people that this many judges have thought that this was important enough to come and look at. Trans people aren't a monolith, which is the case, and what works for one trans person would not be the case for others. Right, like that's what I was trying to say earlier when I said, um, oh, you did want me to go back at that, sure. Here. This was about trans Magic players in general. Could it also be the people who are trans do not feel like they would be welcome into the community? Yes, and I was gonna bring something up, but I forgot to. I have heard of a lot of trans Magic players who don't feel comfortable in competitive spaces because of certain issues. And obviously, the, the point here is that we want to support and encourage those people to feel safe, which just involves making the space be safe, right? Trans people are on a monolith, but it's the case and what works for one trans person will not be the case for others. Right, like that's what I was trying to mention here and also here, right? Where it's like people have different experiences. And like, for example, like for me, like the whole like my pronouns are thing, like I will do it, but it's not for me, right? Like there are other trans people for which this is very important, but that is not me. But I'm still gonna do it. So it's just about fostering that environment. I guess I will hang out until the top of the hour when we have a new person. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So one last thought about that pie chart is that I think the most likely scenario is that the age at which people typically learn magic um, is younger than the age that people typically come out. So this is how people's life path works. Um, but that doesn't. But once again, people can learn magic whenever they like. People can come out whenever they like. So there is a variance in that, obviously. But this is just what I've noticed that tends to happen. What I find hard with everyone is I'm often unsure what the best way to find out how to make things work as well as possible when not making them feel comfortable or feel othered, or even risking outing them unintentionally. Right. I think that for most of from most trans people, like if you're at least trying, that is enough. And if you're genuinely trying and you're willing to listen, if you're here, like that is an important step, right? Like then that is good enough in a certain way. But you should think about. Yeah, and of course, if you have any other thoughts, like here are my socials, please message me, right? Like I'm not doing anything for the rest of today, and it's like 10 a.m. So yeah, cool. So I will close this out, and we will. Oh, think there should be a feedback form being posted, something like that. I don't know, something like that. But yeah, I will close this out, and I will have the next person come in.